Okay, I'm going to start. Tonight we're starting a new series that B'ezrat Hashem will last about 7 months, and we will cover Kashrut, Taharat HaMishpacha, and Shabbat. Kashrut are the laws concerning what we may eat, but it encompasses many other laws which involve the kosher kitchen as well. We'll cover family purity laws and the halachot, the many details that pertain to Shabbat. Shabbat is the longest one, but each one of them will take at least 8 weeks or so. Tonight we'll be beginning with Kashrut. Kashrut is the first topic. But before I begin, I just want to give an introduction. B'ezrat Hashem, the halachot, the actual details of Kashrut will begin next week. So whoever you know that may be interested in something like this, in knowing how to maintain a kosher home, definitely encourage him to come beginning with next week. Today I just want to give an introduction about the idea of kashrut and a little bit about the mitzvot as well. In nature, a lot of things we do by instinct. HaKadosh Baruch Hu put it in the teva that the human being and even the animal knows how to do certain things according to his instinct. For example, a mother, even if she wouldn't be told or instructed, she would know how to nurse her baby, believe it or not. The animals do so too, and they're not taught. Kadosh Baruch Hu put it into the teva, into the bria, into nature, into the creation, certain instincts that are natural, that do not have to be learned. You do them automatically. But you would all agree with me that, let's take the example of marriage or raising children. Even though some of it may be by instinct, a lot of it needs to be learned. It requires skills to know how to raise children properly, how to maintain a good marriage, the shalom bayit, the peace at home. After all, man and woman are different. So those two areas are more complex. You cannot just handle them by pure instinct. You do not necessarily have the right answers for every situation. They require skills that need to be learned. The same is true with the mitzvot. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us mitzvot, and the mitzvot, once you study them in detail, you realize how many halachot we depend on these mitzvot on a day-to-day basis, and there is no way in the world that one can do these mitzvot, fulfill these mitzvot, by instinct, without learning. It is important to learn. There's no way out of it. And as you will see, with Kashrut, with Shabbat, with Taharat HaMishpacha, there are quite a few details in all these three areas. It is impossible for one to know on his own what to do. There are many situations that are complicated, that even if you know and you learned, you still have to ask, you still have to consult with the rabbi what to do. It can become very complicated. So there are quite a few important areas that we need to learn, and these three, I feel, are very important, and I call them the cornerstones of a Jewish home, Yesodot HaBayit HaYehudi, for a variety of reasons. Number one, Kashrut, Taharat HaMishpacha, and Shabbat are something that affect both men and women. They both need to know about it. They both need to be aware about it. Number two, they affect us and they are relevant on a daily basis. They apply almost all the time. Even though Shabbat is once a week, it's still every week. And number three, Jewish survival, believe it or not, depended all along on these three areas, especially Taharat HaMishpacha and Shabbat. Kashrut also, but Jewish survival depended on these three. So when we wish a new couple, shetisku livnot bayit ne'eman b'Yisrael, that you should be worthy and succeed in building a home that is ne'eman, that is true to the Jewish spirit, to the Jewish law, to the Torah, we mean that it has a healthy and strong foundation in all areas, but especially in these three areas. Ne'emanut means that it's reliable, it's strong. Not only is it strong that it maintains itself, but it is strong enough also to hand over to the future generation, to the children, to transmit to them what it knows. So you can see how important all of this is, because if we want the Jewish people to survive, there has to be a transmission of these yesodot, of these foundations, that without them the Jewish nation would not survive. So they have to be strong. There can't be no compromise. So in order for these areas to be strong, one needs to be knowledgeable in these areas and learn about them. We discussed in the beginning of the series of Ta'amei Mitzvot, the reasons behind the 613 commandments which we just finished after close to 4 years, that there are various types of mitzvot. There are mishpatim, the regular commandments, which are mostly ben adam lechavero, between man and man. But there are also chukim. Chukim are gezerot, decrees that are mostly applied ben adam lemakom, between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There are also other categories of mitzvot, for example, Shabbatot and Chagim, which are mostly either once a week or once a year, which come as a reminder of something that happened in the past. These are Moadim, Shabbatot. It is an oath between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Zecher leMaaseh Bereshit, or Zecher Litziat Mitzrayim, something to remember something. These are other categories of mitzvot. But for the most part, the chukim, which are between us and Borei Olam, are decrees that we do not necessarily understand the reason for. Whereas mishpatim are more common sense between us and our fellow Jew, and the chukim are more difficult to understand. But just because they're more difficult to understand does not mean that they have no reason or explanation. Every mitzvah that Hashem gave us has a reason behind it. And we try to explain a little bit of what the reasoning of every mitzvah is in the Taryag Mitzvot. You will see that even these areas, Kashrut, Tarat HaMishpacha, and Shabbat, which happen to be chukim, have good reason. There's a good reason of why we need to keep them. They will make some sense to us once we learn about them. But at first, you must realize that they are classified as chukim as well. Kashrut, the dietary laws, what we can eat and what we cannot eat, why the Torah forbids certain things. This whole system of what we put into our system, in other words, what we eat, is a chok. So at face value, we must remember that it is something which we cannot offer a logical explanation, but it's nevertheless very important, extremely important to the Jew to be careful with these laws. Now, you will be a little bit amazed, beginning with next week, when we start covering all the details, that there are a lot of details, a lot of halachot. And we're going to be beginning with Kashrut, that, as I said before, will last maybe 8 weeks, maybe a little bit more. And I'm going to give you soon an example of what I mean by Kashrut. And you're going to be amazed how much there is. So I'm letting you know right now that I'm not expecting anybody to memorize all of this. It's impossible to memorize. The purpose of the lecture is to make us aware. It's muda'ut, to make us aware of what we need to look out for, what we need to be concerned if something happens in the kitchen, if some milk spills into your chamin that you're preparing for Shabbat. Now what? You have no more chamin, right? There are issues, there are many concerns that one has to be aware about. So after this whole presentation, hopefully after the 8 or 10 weeks or so, if you're here all the time, you will become aware of what issues exist, what to look out for, what to be concerned about, and what to ask if there's a need to ask. And from time to time there is a need to ask. My wife asks me all the time, this happened, what do I do now? So in every house things happen and one needs to know. And when you don't know the answer on your own, you have to know something else, that it's time to ask somebody else. So that's very important. We don't know everything. It's impossible to know everything. It's important to ask those who are knowledgeable, or to consult, or to look it up in a sefer if you know how to check it, and not just to assume that you know. There are many details, and in Shabbat there are even more details, hundreds and thousands of details. And we're of course not able to cover everything. I want to just give you a general overview with the most important, relevant halachot that we come across all the time that we need to be aware of. So if you want to take notes, you can take notes, but hopefully beginning with next week, I intend to use some visual device to assist us, maybe overhead projector or some board, so we can follow a little bit closer each point. Perhaps let me give you just a little bit of sense of what to expect in Kashrut. The subject of Kashrut has another name that you might find in reading about it. It's called Machalot Asurot, forbidden foods. Now when you hear the word forbidden foods, what do you think of? Anybody, what do you think of when you hear Machalot Asurot? You think about pork? What else? What? What is that? No, when we talk about Machalot Asurot, forbidden foods, what comes to your mind? What is forbidden to eat? What? Crab, seafood, anything else? Bugs, all of what you just mentioned is just one category out of over 20 that I have that are Machalot Asurot. How about Chametz on Pesach? It's a Machal Asur on Pesach. Okay? How about Dam, blood, right? How about Tolaim? insects. You're eating cabbage and cauliflower. There might be insects, aphids, and I'm going to show you pictures of them, Bezat Hashem. So you're eating something kosher, but there could be other problems. Wine from a goy, it's wine, it's grape juice. It comes from grapes. What's wrong with it? But depends who made it. Yes? Okay. Eventually, when we talk about Yain Nesach, we'll discuss it more in depth. Then you have, in Eretz Yisrael, you have Trumot and Maasrot. You can't eat certain foods until there is a hafrasha. You've separated the Trumot and Maasrot. Then you have Chala, you have Ever Min HaChai, you have Hadash, you have Kil'aim, you have cheese that was made by a goy, milk that was milked by a goy. Now, don't misunderstand me. Milk that was milked by a goy can be kasher under certain conditions. But I'm just giving you example. I'm listening to you. All the items that would come under the category of ma'achalot asurot, not just pork, not just alligator meat, not just seafood. These are things which come under the category of ma'achalot asurot because the animal itself is a behemah shenena tehora. It's an unclean animal. And that is one of the first things we'll be talking about, is identifying those animals that are unclean, identifying the birds that are unclean, and identifying the fish that are not kosher. So I'm not going to list to you the millions of fish which are in the world, but I'm going to give you a list of the most common popular fish in the world with the various names that they are called in Spanish, in French, in Portuguese. So you will be able to recognize them according to which country you come from. Because the same fish that we eat here has a different name in Mexico, for example, or in Brazil. So we were going to discuss all of this too. But this is just in that one category of identifying that which we could eat as far as the animals and the fish and the birds. But then there's all these other areas. Basar bechalav, the mixture of milk and meat. You cannot mix the two, you cannot cook the two. But what happens if they were cooked together? The result, the combination of the two is asur, ze ma'achal asur. Right? It would be one of the ma'achalot asurot, right? Or, for example, you have blood. What do you do if you have blood on eggs? And there's something called asur mipnei hasakana, which I'll talk about maybe a little bit later. It's asur because it's dangerous. It's dangerous to your health. That's another category of ma'achalot asurot. We'll talk about hagala utvilat kelim, which has to do with kashrut, immersing certain vessels that you buy in a store, dishes, cups, in a mikveh, especially for kelim, before you could eat in them. Or if something became tarev, how do you make it kosher? How do you make your oven kosher? Whether it's for Pesach or whether it's tarev. Let's say you bought it used. You shouldn't buy it used. You should buy all these things new. But let's say you want to eat. How could you make something kasher? This is important, especially for caterers that need to use hotels. So I don't know if many of you are catering, but it's good to know anyway. So you should be aware what goes on. The reason why I'm going to get into all of this is for another important reason. You need to know in which home you could eat. Because if you suspect the people that you're invited to eat at their home, at their place, are not knowledgeable about these things, then you can't trust them. And if you can't trust them, even if they tell you it's kosher, you can't eat. Unless you have evidence, some evidence, that you know that they've gone out of their way to make everything kasher in their home. Otherwise, if somebody is not careful in a particular area, he cannot give testimony in that area. He's pasul le'edut for that. He cannot say something like, well, how could you say this is kosher if you yourself don't keep kosher? He is unreliable. So that is why we need to cover as much as we can, so we know what to do when we're invited to a wedding, certain establishment. Perhaps pay a visit to the kitchen and see if there's a mashgiach, if there's somebody supervising there. We have to be aware of certain issues that are important, that without them, it's difficult to trust. Because if you know that there has to be a mashgiach and there isn't, well, what do you do now? Can you trust the goy? He's the one that's cooking. So there are many, many issues. Another issue that we will be discussing is, are there any problems in going out to eat in a restaurant? Well, there are for Sfaradim, more than for Ashkenazim. Because we'll be talking about the topic called Bishul Akum in itself, a very important area, especially if you have a maid in your house. What could you allow her to cook for you? I just came back from Mexico, and the home where I was staying told me that they don't let the maids cook anything in the house. Some homes have the special kelim for the goyim, for the maid. You cook in your own frying pan, in your own pot.
In this home, no, we don't let them touch anything. They can make the whole kitchen tarif. So we'll be discussing this area too. What can go wrong in a home if somebody has a maid? So you're beginning to see all of this is under the category of ma'achalot asurot, something that was cooked by a goy. It may be completely asur. Not only is the food asur possibly, but even the keli is taref. You have to be mag'il. You have to somehow put it into boiling water, depending on the type of vessel it is, and bring it back to its kosher status. These are a lot of issues that go on a daily basis in a Jewish home, or in another establishment, in a school, at a restaurant, at a banquet hall, or whatever. We need to be aware of these issues. And one of the last topics that we will be covering is achilat motzarim bashuk. You go to Ralph's, you go to a supermarket. We'll be spending quite a bit of time on that. What to look out for. Is a K okay? Does it have to be an OK? What about an OU? What about a triangle K? Are these reliable supervision? What's the difference between them? Now, you don't have to know all of this, but I'm nevertheless going to share a little bit with you so that in case somebody asks you, be prepared to answer. You see a product, there is no supervision. Could you eat it? Well, it depends. Are you very familiar with ingredients? Would you recognize every single ingredient there? What should you be concerned with? What does natural flavors mean? It doesn't say which flavor, it just says natural. Well, there's a natural flavor that comes from a cat and from a cockroach. It's natural. It's natural. It's not synthetic. It's a natural flavor, but it comes from an unclean source. So we'll be talking about that too. How to know what may be eaten, what may be consumed without any supervision, and what requires supervision, and the different types of supervisions. Okay, just wanted you to have an idea of what we'll be covering and why it will take us several weeks to cover each one of these areas. Okay, let's begin with Kashrut. What do we know that there is a problem with Kashrut? The Torah tells us in Parshat Shemini all about the animals that are permissible and the animals that are not permissible, and it sheds a little bit of light as to what the problem is by giving us some key words. And one of the key words is Al Teshaketzu et Nafshotechem. Al Teshaketzu means don't, how would we translate Teshaketzu? There's a special word for it. Don't foul up your soul. There might be a better word for it. Al Teshaketzu, Al Telachlechu et Nafshotechem. Don't foul up, don't make your soul dirty. What do we see from these words that are associated with the foods that are forbidden? That the Torah is emphasizing nefesh, not the body. There's not a health problem. You're not going to necessarily die from eating one of these animals. The goyim eat these animals all the time and they don't die young. They live long lives sometimes. So it's not a health matter, even though there might be some animals that are unhealthy to eat. But that's not the main reason. Torah forbids it for some reason, and it also tells us, by the way, Al teshaketzu nafshotechem. By eating these, you are causing your nefesh to become soiled or fouled up. So we see that there's something spiritual going on in the in the eating of that which is tameh, that which is unclean. That's number one. Another clue is that the Torah in the same parasha tells us V'yitem kedoshim, that you should be holy to Hashem. Holy, what's holiness? Holiness is also, again, something spiritual, something that affects the neshama, not the body. So far we know that the problem, or the root of the problem here, has to do with the nefesh, the neshama, not the body itself. That whatever one eats affects his spirit. The Torah says, V'yitem kedoshim, and you should be holy. Why? What's the importance of being holy? So the Kabbalah explains, when one becomes holy, one becomes closer to Hashem. When one becomes tameh, unclean, one becomes more distant from Hashem. And in order for us to become close to Hashem, in order for us to fulfill the mitzvot properly, after all, we have a mission. We have a responsibility. Hashem gave us instructions what to do. In order for us to be able to do a good job, to perform well, it is only possible if one is holy, if one is clean. If one is tameh, he will have a hard time fulfilling the mitzvot. And I'm going to give you some incredible examples of how the tum'ah affects performance in the mitzvot. And incredible. You may have nightmares from this. I hope not, because all of you, Baruch Hashem, eat kosher. But whoever is not, this is going to be very disturbing, because the tum'ah affects performance. So if we want to perform, we want to get close to Hashem, we want to have a good relationship with Him, we need to be holy. In order to maintain that holiness, we need to be careful with what we eat. There's apparently an influence from the food even though all it is food, somehow that food affects the neshama. There's a pasuk in Pashat Kedoshim that reads, be careful with what you eat. Why? Because you shouldn't become tameh. V'nitmetem bam. If you see that word v'nitmetem, you will see that it's missing an aleph. So the rabbis tell us, al tikra, don't read it, v'nitmetem ela v'nitamtem, that if you eat from these foods, they block your heart, they cause a blockage. Yeah, it causes a timtum, a certain, I call it blockage, but it's more than a blockage. It causes a certain, what would you call timtum? No. It causes a certain blockage. No. In the mind, it a certain covering. Yeah, it causes a certain blockage of the mind. Yes, yeah, that's what we're talking about. Timtum halev, that the heart, the mind becomes metumtam. It becomes like dull and dumb and blocked. From what? From eating these things. So there's an aleph missing. So in order for you to be able to interpret that is one of the consequences of eating ma'achalot asurot. Desensitized, very true. And you will see that very soon. Let me share with you a story, and from the story you will understand what this is, this timtum. The Rambam, Maimonides, once received a letter from a community, and in the letter there was a question. We know that the rabbis speak about Chiyat HaMetim, when the dead will rise again, and that they try to explain it in their way, how they know that this will happen, because there is no clear pasuk in the Torah that will happen, but the rabbis learn it out in their way, how this will occur. And they said, we're not so sure that what the rabbi said, is very true, because we can offer other ideas and object to those interpretations and to those explanations. And perhaps it's not so clear or evident from the Torah at all that there is Chalila, that there's no Chalila Tchiyat HaMetim. Can you please elaborate a little bit more? That was the question to the Rambam, if there's any proof that there's Tchiyat HaMetim. The Rambam did not respond to them directly. He asked his student to respond. And this is briefly what he said. It is known that the food one eats makes blood in the system. That blood travels to the heart, and eventually it is filtered to the brain. And when one eats healthy food, kosher food, clean food, then the blood is clean, then the mind is pure. When one does not eat kosher food, when one eats unclean food, then the mind becomes polluted. The rabbis, who were so clean and pure and holy, they had a clear and lucid mind. They were able to come to the true conclusions of what the Torah meant and what the source for everything is, and they were able to derive it from all parts of the Torah. And therefore what they said was true, because they had Ruach HaKodesh as a result of their Kedusha. You, by doubting the words of the rabbis, by having sfekot about what they said, is indicative to me, shenichshaltem b'ma'achalot asurot. It is clear to me, it is obvious to me that by you doubting what the rabbi said, by objecting to what they said, that it must be that you have eaten averot trefot, you have eaten unclean animals, you have not kept kosher. And as a result of that, I'm sure that very soon something terrible will happen to you. And the story goes on to say that not too long after that, a king conquered that community and destroyed it all, and many of them were killed. The point of the story is very clear, that their doubting of what the rabbis said, who were such holy people, can only come about, these doubts, because their moach became metumtam as a result of eating ma'achalot asirot, unclean food. Had they been clean, had they been careful with kosher foods, they would have not doubted. They would have accepted, just like our forefathers accepted generation after generation. When one begins to doubt strongly what his forefathers, what the rabbis who were so great said, there is room to suspect that maybe nichshal, maybe he somehow fell and did not keep the dietary laws properly. I'm going to quote to you several other incidents that illustrate the same point on how this affects the mind. It is mentioned in the name of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Mirimonov that he was once asked, why is it that many children, Jewish children, who start out learning in a Jewish day school, who pray fervently, who keep the mitzvot, but when they grow up, they let go everything. They're no longer concerned with the praying on time. They no longer learn Torah. What happened to them? And he said many times these kids were fed money that their parents stole. So the food that they ate came from gezel, from money that was stolen, cheated, money that's not kasher, or that they ate ma'achalot asurot. Either of the two has the ability to influence these children in a very negative way, that even if they had a strong foundation, they can easily depart from it, easily let go of it later, because the ma'achalot asurot, whether it was from gezel or something else, stays in their blood. And much of the suffering that people have in this world, people experience suffering. A lot of times the Zohar says a lot of the suffering is as a result of eating ma'achalot asurot. A person who was not careful with what he ate, that could be one of the reasons of why he is suffering. The Or HaChaim says something very important, that even if you ate something b'shogeg, unintentionally, by accident, most other sins in the Torah, if you did something b'shogeg, so you bring a korban chatat, you would bring a sacrifice during the days of the Bet HaMikdash. Eating something even b'shogeg is not so good. Why? Because even the shgaga brings about some tumah. So what if you did it unintentionally? The tumah still came about. Therefore, it is said in the name of the Baal Shem Tov that even if somebody ate b'shogeg, it requires a tikkun. He should get some sort of tikkun for doing a b'shogeg, to remove that tumah. Another Sefer Torat Moshe, says something else. You wonder why there's a lot of apikorsim in our times. Apikorsim are people who deny the Torah even though their fathers or their grandparents were observant Jews. It is because they ate ma'achalot asurot. And as another rabbi said, by eating ma'achalot asurot, a person loses his fear for God and he becomes chatzuf. So a lot of the chutzpah of many people could be as a result that they nichshelu b'ma'achalot asurot, that they ate something unclean. Another Sefer Or HaGanuz says a person who is not careful with ma'achalot asurot, eno mitpalel karaui, his prayer is not good. He cannot concentrate, he cannot think properly, it doesn't come out right. Another source says that a person who is not careful, even if it's Isur de Rabbanan, even if it's something which is not written in the Torah, just the rabbis tell us not to eat it. What's an example of a rabbinical decree in the laws of dietary laws? Anybody know an example? To eat chicken with milk. The Torah only says beef cannot be eaten with milk, but the rabbis said that no, you cannot even eat chicken with milk. So even if somebody is not careful with a drabanan, with something which is forbidden by rabbinical decree, ze moshech oto or mevi oto, this brings him to averot chamurot yoter. As the rabbis tell us, avera goreret avera. So a person who is not careful with machalot asurot, even if it's midrabanan, it leads him to chas v'shalom do averot which are even more serious in the end. And finally, the Sfat Emet says something incredible. A person who is not careful with machalot asurot, what he's doing to himself is umeshabed et hanefesh laguf. He's slowly but surely enslaving the neshama to the body. The body becomes more materialistic and more immersed in itself. And that's all it desires, is that which satisfies the body and not the spirit. So the ma'achalot asurot they do a tremendous amount of damage, what we see from this, to the neshama. Alright, now let me tell you what happens to somebody who is careful with ma'achalot asurot. I just gave you examples of somebody who's not careful. Let me tell you a story that happened in Spain during the time of the Inquisition. There were two young men who escaped from the Inquisition by boat. And because there was a storm at sea, they landed somewhere else, not at their final destination. They landed somewhere else in Spain. Each one went his own way, looking for a place to stay. And they both entered a home that appeared very, very Christian. There was a cross on the wall. There was a picture of this saint here. It was a very Christian home in every sense. But they had no choice. What can they do? They needed to survive. They needed to eat. And the hosts, of course, fed them. And they ate whatever they were given. They had no choice. And they felt very bad. Each of them felt very bad. What could they do? Machalot asurot. These are forbidden foods, but we have no choice. By the way, if somebody's in the desert and he has nothing to eat, it's permissible for you to eat anything to survive. It's not one of the three cardinal sins, Gilui Arayot, that you have to give your life for it. You eat to survive. People have eaten almost anything, depending on the circumstances. But anyway, they still felt bad. They're Jews. They were running away from the Inquisition. They didn't want to give in. But here they had no choice, and they felt bad. After they spent a couple days there, and they were about to depart to continue on their way, they thanked the host for the hospitality, and one of the hosts, came over to the Jewish guests and tells them, I have a secret to tell you. You should know that the 3-4 days that you were with us, you ate only kasher. You have not consumed anything which is unclean, because we're Jewish. Even though you saw a very Christian home, that is only for the outside appearance. In reality, as you know, most of you I think are familiar with what went on during the Inquisition, there were a lot of Marano Jews that outwardly behaved and appeared like they were following Catholicism, but inwardly or secretly they kept their Jewishness. They put on tefillin in a basement. They kept Shabbat as much as possible. So we are Marano's Jews, and you should know that everything you ate, everything you put into your mouth is kasher lamehadrin. You should be happy. Baruch Hashem, thank you very much. He was very, very glad. The other friend did not have the same luck. He, in fact, did land in a non-Jewish home, in a Catholic home. He didn't have the same luck. So they meet up together to go on their way. And the one, of course, who was not so lucky, was very bitter and very distressed about it. Why did my friend have the luck of landing in a Jewish home and not eating tarif, and I did not have the same luck? So as soon as they arrived in the Jewish community, that young man who was not so lucky went to the rabbi. Rabbi, you have to explain to me, why is it that my friend was so fortunate, lucky, and he was able to be at a Jewish home and not eat anything tarif, and I wasn't so lucky? So the rabbi asks him, let me ask you, did you ever in your life voluntarily, intentionally, knowingly eat something that was not kasher? So the young man starts thinking, yeah, once. When I was a young boy, I had some non-Jewish friends. We went to the park, and they were having a picnic, and each one took out his food, and they had some cheese, and I was hungry, and I had a ta'ava. I wanted to taste it, a little bit of the cheese, and they offered me a little bit of the cheese. But that was the only time, Rabbi, I ever did it. So the rabbi says, that's enough. HaKadosh Baruch Hu only protects those who protect themselves. Those who are careful, HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes sure that nothing happens to them. That is the meaning of the pasuk in Shemuel. Raglei chasidav yishmor. Hashem protects the tzaddikim, that no michshol should happen to them, that nothing should happen to them by accident. And there are countless stories of rabbis, tzaddikim, many stories of how somehow they felt that this was not kasher, or somehow the soup spilled. Something happened, and at the end they did not eat from that food. Why? Because Hashem watched over them. And it has happened to me in one situation where, I should have been a little bit more careful, and I almost fell into a trap. It happened on Mexicana Airlines. Since then I don't travel on that airline. I'm very disappointed with them. I did not get my meal. So I said, perhaps maybe look a little harder. Maybe there is another kosher meal. He says, I'm sorry, we don't have it, but let me look anyway. At the end, he comes and brings me what appears to be a kosher meal. Platter with an aluminum foil. It looks, kosher. But I was hungry and I wasn't paying attention. And what I should have done was, of course, look for the seal, look for the wrapper that has to be perforated. They can't open it. This was a little bit, strange, but it was covered with aluminum foil, and it appeared kosher. And he said it was kosher. I opened it up. I start pouring already the salt and the pepper over the chicken. Then I look at the one who's sitting next to me, the other passenger. Wait a second. We have the same platter, the same menu, the same chicken, the same potatoes on the same corner, the same vegetables. I said, this is not kosher. This is taref. And then I said to myself, oi, of course it's taref. Where's all the kosher stamps? Where's everything else that says that this is kosher? That is from this company. I said to the steward, this is not kasher. Oh, he says it's not? What do you think but make something kasher? By the rabbi blessing it? Some people have that attitude. When is something kasher if the rabbi blesses it? Maybe he thought by putting aluminum foil, he can convince and trick me. And that's what he was trying to do. I, of course, was a little naive. I didn't pay attention. I was in a hurry. You have to be very, very careful. You can't. How could you trust a goy? But Baruch Hashem, At the last moment, I turned around and I saw this is, the same platter, the same food. Of course it's not kasher. And I, of course, gave it back. So you have to be very, very careful in these areas. And those who are careful, truly careful, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu protects them. That they should not even be nichshal, that they should not fall for it, even by accident, unintentionally. Just want to finish with a few more points. There are individuals who have a hard time with mitzvot, even with kashrut. And one of the reasons is that they are used to eating certain foods, and they're called mumar leteavon. They love Domino's pizza, for example. They just, have to have it. Even though there's kosher pizza, no, they want to have that too. Or even if there is no kosher pizza, but they'd like to have pizza. So they go and eat something taref leteavon. Not le'ach'is chalila. Not because they're against the Torah, they don't believe in it. It's called leteavon, for their appetite, for their satisfaction. That's a problem. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit later. I want to concentrate on another individual who tries to justify what he does. Why don't I keep kashrut? Because the kashrut is not so important. It's only in the olden days when it was primitive and it was not sanitary. He comes up with an excuse to try to justify why he doesn't eat kasher. That's a different kind of a phenomenon. It's a different kind of mentality. And it needs to be dealt with because we may encounter these people. And one of the things that he does in order to defend himself, he asks you. He puts you on the defensive. What's the reason for it? You can't tell him health reasons because everybody who's eating these things are healthy. So if you're unprepared, he's going to say, you see, it's probably nothing. Nothing happens to me. Now, rabbis do tell us, Dama shetashiv lapikoros. You have to know what to answer on epikoros. You have to be prepared. If you're not prepared to answer on epikoros, then don't argue with him, because he might convince you. So be careful with who you're arguing with. Unless you have a good answer, don't argue with him. Nevertheless, when it comes to kashrut, there is one answer everybody can give, a very easy answer. Lama ze asur? Mipnei she'Hashem amar kacha. Why is it forbidden? Because Hashem said so. Now, why is this such a good answer? If you read Parshat Chukat, that talks about the red heifer, Paraduma, this is the way it begins. Zot Chukat HaTorah Shetziva Hashem. Paraduma, the red heifer, is a chok. Why do you have to have a red cow? Burn its ashes. And that is the way you make somebody clean who's been tameh. It's one of the true classical chokim, decree that very difficult to understand. And what does the Torah say on that chok? Zot Chukat Torah Shetziva Hashem. You want to know why you need to do this? Asher tzivah Hashem, that's all. Hashem commanded so. Is that good enough for you? Now, if he says, I don't believe in Hashem, then of course you have a problem. But not everybody says so. Of course he believes, of course, But this is primitive. Asher tzivah Hashem. Why? Hashem said so. That's good enough for me. Why isn't it good enough for you? Put him on the defensive. It was good enough for your father. It was good enough for your grandfather. It was good enough for your great-grandfather. How careful they were. You know how many Jews in the concentration camps were tried to be as careful as possible not to eat something taref? Many of them had no choice. They barely gave them a small piece of dry, moldy bread with a little bit of margarine every day. If they found some meat, they jumped on it. But not everybody. A lot of Jews, mamash, were willing to sacrifice everything. Give me a little bit more of bread and I'll give you my meat and my soup, which is taref. They didn't want to put any, even though it was mutar for them. They were as careful as possible. It was good enough for your father, for your grandfather. They gave their lives for this. It's not good enough for you. So there are many ways to deal with an individual who tries to become combative or logical about this in saying that this is primitive, it doesn't apply today. But the best answer is Asher tzivah Hashem, and I'll tell you why. The rabbis tell us in the Midrash, Al tomar I efshi bebasar chazir, ela efshi ela ma eseh she'avi shebashamayim tzivah alai. Never say, I hate pork. It doesn't taste good. It's disgusting. Never say that about nevelot utrefot, about ma'achalot asirot. What should you say? Your attitude should be, I could eat it, but what could I do? HaKadosh Baruch Hu decreed and said that I should not. What are the rabbis trying to tell us? Don't try to give an explanation, a logical explanation when it comes to hukim, to decrees. It is always best to say, Asher Hashem tzivah, what should I do? Maybe, maybe it would be okay, maybe it would taste okay, maybe I would like it. The best answer is always, what should I do? Hashem said so. Now, why is this such a powerful answer? First of all, you stop the argument, the discussion on the spot. But there's something more important than that. If a person begins to give a logical explanation for chukim, there's a danger that he's going to try to explain everything logically. And what happens when you start to explain everything logically? You forget that the source of this commandment is Hashem. You forget that Hashem is the one that said it's asur. So if you offer logical explanations of everything becomes logical. You know why you can't do this? Because of this, because of this, because of that. No, Hashem Tziva, we cannot forget that Hashem is behind these commandments. In order for us not to forget, we must continuously say Hashem Tziva, that is why it's asur, and not to begin to rationalize. Another, of course, problem is if you begin to rationalize, he may be smarter than you. He may counter you. Always say Hashem Tziva. If you're ever in doubt, Hashem said so. That's all. That's good enough for me. Just to finish up, the two pieces of advice for those who want to fulfill the mitzvot, who want to be mekayem the mitzvot. One of the best advices is to realize at all times that the mitzvot are for our benefit. A person who realizes that the mitzvot are for his benefit, they will never be a burden. It's for my benefit. Hashem gave it to me. He doesn't need this. Why should he care what I eat? Why should Hashem care if I put on tefillin every day? Does it make a difference to him? When we bring a sacrifice, does Hashem eat from the sacrifice? So a Jew must remember that Hashem gave us the mitzvot for our benefit, the tovatenu. If one has that mindset, then the Torah is not an ol. It's not a burden. On the contrary, he will appreciate the mitzvot. He will realize that they're important. A Jew who knows that the mitzvot are important, that the mitzvot come from Borei Olam, that the mitzvot are for his benefit, he does them gladly. He has no problem with them. And he does them even when it's difficult for him to do it. Because there are some Jews that will say, okay, I'll do it now, but now it's a little difficult for me. You know, I'm in Oklahoma City, there's no Ralph's supermarket here. What should I eat? Today, Baruch Hashem, there's a lot of kosher products. You have no excuse. Go into any supermarket, you will find food that's been supervised in Denver, food that's been supervised in Michigan, food that's been supervised in all sorts of places, even food that's supervised in Mexico, and it's imported to the United States. There's a lot of food. Oh, you want hot food? Sacrifice a little bit. You're on the road, you're in Oklahoma City, you're in Wichita, you're in all these places where there is no kosher restaurant. Take food with you. Take tuna cans. There's a lot of ways to avoid the problem of kashrut. There's no excuse. A Jew who therefore loves the mitzvot, who realizes how important it is to him, that he realized that Hashem gave it to him for his benefit, that it does something to the neshama, how could he ever think of giving it up, even if it's difficult? You see? It depends on your attitude. So the most important attitude is to remember that this is the tovatenu. Hashem wants us to be careful with what we eat because it affects our neshama, it affects our soul. Last point that I want to make is what I said in the beginning, that there are certain foods that are forbidden because they're dangerous. And the rabbis tell us, Chamira sakanta mi'isura. If something is dangerous to your health, it is more forbidden and more strict than if it would be forbidden by the Torah. It's sakana, ze mesukan, ze yoter chamur. It's stricter than if it's just because it's forbidden by the Torah. Chamira sakanta mi'isura. So we'll be talking about that category more in detail when we get to it, of what things are forbidden because they're dangerous to eat. But the reason I'm mentioning it now is because, remember, even though some things may be permissible to eat, there's something else called eating healthy. So even though you have a kosher kitchen, even though you've bought kosher products and everything in your home is kosher, you can still make yourself unhealthy by not eating properly. So that is a whole different department, and I leave that to those who are more into dieting, in looking into how to eat healthy. I'm just saying it in general terms, that the Torah does say, "V'nishmartem me'od lenafshotechem." Watch your health. You know, you have permission to eat all these goodies. That may be kosher, but they may be dangerous to your health just as much as anything else. So eating properly is also a mitzvah. And last but not least, I'm going to leave you with the famous saying in English, you are what you eat. Just remember that a person's mentality, perhaps personality, attitude in life is formed in part at least by what he eats. It could affect his mood. As the rabbis tell us that a lot of the achzariyut, the cruelty that the goyim have, comes from the foods that they eat. They eat nachashim ve'akravim, they eat scorpions and they eat snakes and they eat all these things. They may be healthy, but one of the side effects of these foods is shezenotea b'haim, that it implants in them this achzariyut, this cruelty. What the Japanese and what the Nazis did, I mean, that kind of cruelty, not every nation in the world has that. But who knows, maybe they eat things that bring that about. So therefore, that's another good reason to be careful with what you eat, because it affects us and who we are as people. Yes? No, they're fanatic. They're not cruel. Crazy. And when you're crazy and fanatic, you do things that are cruel and etc. Yes. That basically does it for today as an introduction. B'ezrat Hashem, beginning with next week, we'll start with the details, beginning with identifying the animals that are clean from those that are unclean. And after that, the process of shechita, what's involved in the shechita. And you will learn next week why kosher food is more expensive than non-kosher food, because of the various steps that go in preparing that food, from the slaughtering until it gets to your kitchen. So B'ezrat Hashem, that we will begin next week. Any questions? You need any recipes? I should ask you, sir. Yeah. Okay, so see you next week, B'ezrat Hashem.